What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 11. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over each position and break down a couple of my favorite players for this NFL DFS main slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Okay guys, NFL Week 11, let's take a look at the quarterback position. I like Ben Roethlisberger from the Pittsburgh Steelers playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have the second worst defense overall, and they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Ben Roethlisberger has averaged 20.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 2.1 rush attempts per game. He scored 32 and 28 fantasy points in the last two games, and he's going to be about 7% owned, projected at 19.9 fantasy points here in Week 11. He's $6,700 DraftKings salary and $1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 46 points scored in this game, and they have the Pittsburgh Steelers favored by 10.5. So fantastic matchup here. Ben Roethlisberger has been on fire, so I like Ben Roethlisberger here versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Another quarterback that I like this week that's going to have low ownership is Kirk Cousins from the Minnesota Vikings playing the Dallas Cowboys, who have the third worst defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins has averaged 17.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 1.3 rush attempts per game. But he scored 19 and 21 fantasy points in the last two games, and he's only going to be about 3% owned, projected at 17.4 fantasy points here in Week 11. He's $6,200 DraftKings salary and $900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Vikings favored by 7. So you got a great matchup here. The Dallas Cowboys secondary has been awful all year long, and everyone's going to be playing Dalvin Cook, so they're going to forget about Kirk Cousins, who has Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson with fantastic matchups, and Kirk Cousins could throw a touchdown pass to Dalvin Cook, so he could have a big game. So I like Kirk Cousins here versus the Dallas Cowboys. Now, if you're looking to save some salary at the quarterback position, take a look at Alex Smith from the Washington football team playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Alex Smith, he scored 19 and 17 fantasy points in the last two games. He's only going to be about 7% owned, projected at 16.5 fantasy points here in Week 11, and he's only $5,300 DraftKings salary and $1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47 points scored in this game, with the Washington football team favored by 1.5. So great matchup, close, competitive game. Alex Smith has been playing really well since he came back from that horrific injury. He's playing inspired football, so I like Alex Smith here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Now this next pick, guys, I think it's kind of a long shot. I thought it was going to be Jameis Winston at quarterback. I had picked Jameis Winston earlier in the week as a sleeper pick, but then we just got news that Taysom Hill is going to be the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. He's normally one of those trick players, third down backs. He comes in, he can run the ball, he can pass the ball, but they're going to give him a shot as the starting quarterback. So on DraftKings, he's a quarterback, and on FanDuel, he's a tight end. So on FanDuel, you can play Taysom Hill, a starting quarterback, at the tight end position for $4,500 FanDuel salary. I think that's a smash play right there, but you never know what's going to happen with this guy. Apparently, they're going to let him play the game out. I've heard there's no packages for Jameis Winston, so I don't think they're going to share the quarterback duties here. So Taysom Hill on DraftKings is going to be about 6% owned, but he's going to be about 50% owned on FanDuel because you can play him at the tight end position. He's projected at 18 fantasy points here in week 11, and he's only $4,800 DraftKings salary and $4,500 on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, with the Saints favored by 3.5. Now, he's got a fantastic matchup here. A high-scoring game, a close, competitive game. He's got a lot of talented pieces around him. So I like Taysom Hill here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So, of course, we got Dalvin Cook at the top here. He's one of the best running backs on the slate, but he's $9,000 DraftKings salary and $1,500 more on FanDuel. So Dalvin Cook is a smash play here versus the Dallas Cowboys. The Minnesota Vikings should get the lead in this game, and this should be a running game script, but you never know how Minnesota Vikings are going to score the points here. They could throw some touchdown passes to Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson. Dalvin Cook could get a touchdown pass in this one. Now he's projected at 25.4 fantasy points here in week 11. He's getting an average of 21.8 rush attempts per game and 3.1 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 35% owned, averaging 28.7 fantasy points per game on the season. So great matchup, high scoring game, a running game script. So I like Dalvin Cook here versus the Dallas Cowboys. The other running back I like from that same game is Ezekiel Elliott from the Dallas Cowboys playing the Minnesota Vikings, who have the 8th worst defense overall and they're middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Ezekiel Elliott has averaged 16.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 16.7 rush attempts per game and 5.3 pass targets per game. He's only going to be about 5% owned, projected at 15.6 fantasy points here in week 11. He's $6,500 DraftKings salary and $1,500 more on FanDuel. So a decent matchup here for Ezekiel Elliott, who really hasn't played that well since Dak Prescott went down, but he's gotten over 20 touches the past couple of weeks. So he's bound to find the end zone, and it's a pretty good matchup here. So I like Ezekiel Elliott here versus the Minnesota Vikings. Okay, another running back that I like is Giovanni Bernard from the Cincinnati Bengals playing the Washington football team, who have a good defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Giovanni Bernard, he scored 9, 23, and 21 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He's going to be about 10% owned, projected at 13.9 fantasy points here in week 11. He's $5,500 DraftKings salary and $800 more on FanDuel. So you're going to save a little salary with Giovanni Bernard, who's involved in the passing game. He got 7 pass targets last game. This is going to be a close, competitive game. So I like Giovanni Bernard here versus the Washington football team. And if you're looking to save some salary at the running back position, take a look at Salvon Ahmed from the Miami Dolphins playing the Denver Broncos, who have a middle of the pack defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Salvon Ahmed, he scored 16 fantasy points last game off of 21 rush attempts and 1 pass target. He's only going to be about 4% owned, projected at 10.9 fantasy points here in week 11. He's $4,800 DraftKings salary and 800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45.5 points scored in this game, with the Miami Dolphins favored by 3.5. So it looks like Salvon Ahmed has taken over the running back position for the Miami Dolphins. He should get most of the carries here this week. He got 22 touches last week, so that's a ton of volume, a low price tag, and low ownership. So I like Salvon Ahmed here versus the Denver Broncos.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL, MLB is still going, NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. Now, despite not having a great cornerback wide receiver matchup here, I like Terry McLaurin from the Washington football team playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Terry McLaurin has averaged 18.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.6 pass targets per game. He scored 18, 28, and 22 fantasy points in the last 3 games, so he's been on fire. He's going to be about 13% owned, projected at 17 fantasy points here in week 11. He's 6,900 DraftKings salary and 400 more on FanDuel. So we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 47 points scored in this game, with the Washington football team favored by 1.5. So you got a great matchup, a close, competitive game. So I like Terry McLaurin here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, so I already mentioned these guys, but I do like Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson here versus the Dallas Cowboys. Justin Jefferson has one of the best cornerback wide receiver matchups on the slate. Adam Thielen's going to be about 8% owned, and Justin Jefferson is going to be about 16% owned. Adam Thielen is 6,300 DraftKings salary and 1,600 more on FanDuel, and Justin Jefferson is 6,000 DraftKings salary and 700 more on FanDuel. So nice FanDuel price for Justin Jefferson. And remember, everyone's going to be piled on to Dalvin Cook this week, so I think it makes sense to build some lineups with Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson, because if those are the guys to score the touchdowns, you're going to jump ahead of the field. So I like Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson here versus the Dallas Cowboys. Another wide receiver I like is DJ Chark from the Jacksonville Jaguars playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have a good defense overall, but they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. DJ Chark has averaged 14.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.3 pass targets per game. Now it looks like DJ Chark is not even going to be 1% owned, maybe around 1% ownership. That's way too low. He's on the field for 83% of the snaps, projected at 13.4 fantasy points here in week 11. He's 5,700 DraftKings salary and 500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 46 points scored in this game, with the Jacksonville Jaguars trailing by 10.5. So yes, the Pittsburgh Steelers have a great defense, but they are vulnerable versus opposing wide receivers. This is going to be a passing game script, so DJ Chark could get a ton of volume in this one. So I like DJ Chark here versus the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Okay, another wide receiver that I like is Curtis Samuel from the Carolina Panthers playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 5th worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing wide receivers. Curtis Samuel has averaged 12.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.3 pass targets per game and 2.8 rush attempts per game. He scored 4, 30, and 21 fantasy points in the last 3 games. He's going to be about 8% owned, projected at 11.5 fantasy points. Here in week 11, he's 4,700 DraftKings salary and 900 more on FanDuel. So Vegas thinks there's going to be 46.5 points scored in this game, with the Carolina Panthers trailing by 2. So the reason I like this play is because the Detroit Lions don't have a good run defense, and Curtis Samuel has gotten 3 rush attempts in each of the last 3 games. So he's got some rushing upside, as well as getting 5 to 9 pass targets in the last 3 games. So a ton of volume. So I like Curtis Samuel here versus the Detroit Lions. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. So I think a nice tight end play here, because he's not overpriced, is Mark Andrews from the Baltimore Ravens playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 9th worst defense overall, and they give up the 14th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Mark Andrews has averaged 11 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.9 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 18% owned, projected at 12.4 fantasy points here in week 11. He's 4,900 DraftKings salary and 1,600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, and they have the Baltimore Ravens favored by 5.5. So pretty good matchup here. High scoring game. In a close competitive game, Mark Andrews got 9 pass targets last game. It just feels like he's set up for one of those monster 2 touchdown weeks. So I like Mark Andrews here versus the Tennessee Titans. Another tight end that I like is Hunter Henry from the LA Chargers playing the New York Jets, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Hunter Henry has averaged 9.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.6 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 12% owned, and he's on the field for 89% of the snaps, projected at 11.2 fantasy points here in week 11. He's 4,600 DraftKings salary and 900 more on FanDuel. So great matchup here. Nice consistent passing volume, consistent production. So I like Hunter Henry here versus the New York Jets. Another tight end that I like is Hayden Hurst from the Atlanta Falcons playing the New Orleans Saints, who have a middle of the pack defense overall, but they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Hayden Hurst has averaged 10.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 10% owned, projected at 9.7 fantasy points here in week 11. He's 4,400 DraftKings salary and 1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49.5 points scored in this game, with the Atlanta Falcons trailing by 3.5. So great matchup here. High scoring game, passing game script. So I like Hayden Hurst here versus the New Orleans Saints. And another tight end that I like is Dallas Goedert from the Philadelphia Eagles playing the Cleveland Browns, who have a middle of the pack defense overall, and they give up the 12th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Dallas Goedert has averaged 9.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 14% owned, He's on the field for 100% of the snaps, projected at 10.3 fantasy points here in Week 11. He's only $3,800 DraftKings salary, but he's $2,000 more on FanDuel. So I like that DraftKings price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48 points scored in this game, with the Eagles trailing by 3. So decent matchup, a passing game script. Dallas Goedert got 6 pass targets last game. I think that volume continues here this week, so I like Dallas Goedert here versus the Cleveland Browns.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NFL slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.